Welcome to Exploration Arcanum. My name is Jason. In today's episode, my guest is Arden Leigh. Leigh is an accomplished musician and lead singer of the band Arden and the Wolves. She is also an author, occultist, and chaos magician. Arden's mystical work is influenced by her mentorship with legendary magician and author Grant Morrison, and her course, the Repatterning Project, fuses psychology and magic to help individuals break free from self-limiting beliefs. In this interview, Arden also discusses a core principle of Chaos Magick, which teaches that nothing is true and everything is permitted. I want to thank Arden for coming on the show. I'll put links to her work and social media in the description below. If you enjoy this episode, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more esoteric conversations. Thank you.
Casting circles beneath the midnight sky, incantations beneath the shadow.
Arden Leigh, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's my pleasure and honor, quite frankly, to have you on. I've been a fan for a while, listening to Arden and the Wolves. And I know that you're also a chaos magician and occultist. And I would like to speak to you about that today. First off, could you tell us a little bit about how you first got involved with the occult?
Yeah, for sure. It was a little later in life for me than for many other magicians that I've spoken to who've grown up with the practices. For me, I moved to Los Angeles in 2014, and that's when I really committed to exploring what I felt at the time were more right-brained, more feminine spiritual practices. Because I was back in New York when I lived there. I did get certified in hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming and timeline therapy, which I still use in my practice today, which are all very, in some ways, very sort of, in my perspective, left brain, rather masculine approaches to sometimes the same thing. But I was in circles back in New York where things that, and keep in mind, like this was pre-2014, so it was also, it was kind of before a bit of the witch boom that happened, just a couple of years later. And
Right.
It was also a time when I think there was a lot of latent and not so latent misogyny, and that to be a woman, especially in circles involving NLP and hypnosis, you almost kind of had to prove you were one of the boys, So if I was going to go on and be like, oh, I did some candle magic, I would have been laughed at back in those days.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I also kind of I got this sense, I was like, I really think I've taken my sort of left brain, masculine, analytical approach about as far as it can go. And I was still suffering a great deal of trauma, that I had not brought up the effects of and healed and really addressed, that I didn't really have the wherewithal to do when I was still sort of living in that environment. So I set an intention to move out to Los Angeles and to resensitize, to soften, to embrace more femininity and a more feminist approach to spirituality. It sounds so reductive when I say it like that, but I really, in my mind, had this polarity of West Coast, East Coast, masculine, it was kind of, it's kind of a thing. At least it was for me at the time. And so I went out to Los Angeles, and one of the first things I did is I just started saying, where can I go to, to study these things? In part just because I was like, I'm new here. I need a new social circle, and I need kind of things to do. So I don't, just stay at home and be boring. So I started, looking literally just on meetup.com, and I found a really lovely space called the Green Man over in North Hollywood, which I still go to for a lot of my retail needs. I started out taking classes there, and I started practicing Chaos Magick because the approach of being results-based really spoke to me, because I was moving across the country and really trying to get my life together and heal from a number of things that had happened in my past that, again, I wasn't even really fully aware of how the effects and imprints were still with me.
Right.
I didn't want to waste any time on dogma or tradition for tradition's sake, or I'm also autistic, I would later find out. So the idea of following rules for some arbitrary reason just doesn't sit well with me. So the logic behind chaos magic of you do something or you believe something in order to get this tangible result. I was like, that I can vibe with. This is something I need. I think there's a lot of stories from folks that I've heard about how they get into magic, and it's always these like really beautiful soft origin stories of like, oh, I had an aunt, or I grew up in this garden with all these herbal things around me, and I was like, I just need to get my life together. Like I didn't have the luxury of doing magic for for recreation or for anything that was not going to be linked to a concrete and tangible result in my life.
Right.
So I started I set an intention to start learning or practicing chaos magic, and I bought some books. And then as I'm sure you're familiar with, sometimes just setting an intention or saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And, started learning a lot about Grant Morrison, who I would later meet, who would later on become my teacher.
Right.
Grant literally says just like how to be a magician, simple, declare yourself a magician, practice magic every day. And so I just started there really. And something happened where I started having this awakening for a number of reasons that, I could potentially unpack, but for the sake of brevity, I started seeing some very strong flaws in my own logic of how I was going about life. I'll give you the main one that really did it for me. The main one was I realized that I had a belief that if I was valuable to people, then they would treat me well. And when we make that conscious, when we say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. I'm like, that's laughable, And I thought to myself, in my head, I was like, wow, like people destroy beautiful things all the time. You could be a priceless, like, did you know, like a few years ago, like the Mona Lisa got a cake thrown at her?
Right.
Like, because from someone who was like making a point, like it would be the equivalent of me being like the Mona Lisa and being like, oh, I guess I better do better because I got a cake thrown at me. And it really did challenge my logic, this idea of like I had been in relationships where I would overgive and I would do like so much, and I would work so much on myself to be, not to be happy for my own sake, because being desensitized, going through trauma, sometimes it's even hard to measure that in yourself.
Right.
But rather like to be approved of, to be accepted. I put all this work into that, and it wasn't. And finally I was just like, I am doing the wrong thing for the outcome that I want. I am putting so much energy into this strategy, and what I'm suffering from is a faulty algorithm. This is a faulty internal algorithm that says if X then Y, then I should get this result. And the majority of my anxiety, my depression, and the poor results that I may be getting in my life in these various aspects are all kind of coming from this core belief, or other beliefs, other internal algorithms that are similar, that are like that. So if I just manage to see my own logic and why I'm frustrated and why things aren't working out the way that I think that they should be, why I think they should be different and they're not, then I can see my thinking, and then I can actually, like as an adult, use my conscious awareness to develop a belief or an internal algorithm that actually meets that need. So you repattern it. You say, actually, if I hang out with people who value me and appreciate what I have to offer, and also are capable themselves of having healthy relationships with other people,
Right.
then that's what will ensure that I am treated well. Oh, damn, I've been doing this wrong my whole life. And that honestly like was a seed that for me, my course, the Repatterning Project, which is an 8-week course in essentially this, right? And all of the journey that entails once you start to unweave and untangle those patterns that you've not even maybe made conscious for yourself, that you've just been allowing to dictate your life, that are not getting you the results that you want. And so, yeah, that was about a 2-year journey. And most of that actually came through studying research in trauma, in addiction in particular, because addiction, again, is just a pattern or a strategy that like that is not actually sustainably meeting the need, that we have maybe overlearned beyond its usefulness.
Right.
And attachment styles. And, I already had like my NLP certification. So that kind of came up and fit into the larger puzzle. And 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 then things like Joe Dispenza as well, that sort of beginning to use your thoughts create your reality, like undo all the trauma stuff first. That's very important, because if you don't make that conscious, then you can't really reinstall. Like, I was talking about having to update my browser before I came on. It's like you have to delete the old Chrome file before you can install the new one. That's why it took me a few minutes to sign on. So in the same way, you look at all those past patterns, and then you're like, well, what do I want to create? And also, what is the life that I want for myself? Because if I actually take some time and think about this, and I align myself internally, then it's just a matter of time before my external catches up, and I can amplify that and accelerate it with magic and all this other stuff. So then, like, after that whole kind of awakening period, I sat down and I was like, well, I should probably read those Chaos Magick books I bought, because I went through this whole thing, and then I opened the books and I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I just did, which was kind of my intention, to move out west and to heal and resensitize. And it ended up actually in many ways, like, using the very like left brain analytical skill sets that I had come with.
Right.
But then, like, seeing them in the greater context, creating that more holistic yin yang between the two. It was, yeah. So my initiation into Chaos Magick was in some ways a surprise even to me.
Well, now, how, as the lead singer of Arden and the Wolves, and we'll put links to that in the description so people can check it out, which I highly recommend you all do. How does your magical practice influence your music? And like, does it influence your music? Does it, or vice versa?
Yeah, it's actually really quite simple, in that I realized after some time that the things that I was singing were coming true. And much later on, as in like maybe about a year ago, actually just about a year ago this month, I learned that there is something about my magical phenotype specifically where this is my strongest magical gift.
Right.
Everyone who I think practices magic, and especially those who have a natural aptitude for it, will find that they have strengths in some areas rather than others. And this for me is my absolute strongest, just that thing that I do it and it happens. And naturally, I gravitated toward Grant's work in the beginning. Grant was my first Chaos Magick hero, my first magic hero in general, even beyond just Chaos Magick. And Grant's idea of the hypersigil, this idea that we can write things and they will come true, just fascinated me. It just resonated with me very, very deeply. And I ended up working on the last album. I have a bunch of music coming out in the next year, and then hopefully in
Nice.
the year after that, I'll have a whole lot in the queue, because I'm in studio for, gosh, the past like 8 years now. And I guess like 6 years since I last released the last album. The last album that came out, I knew on some level that it was going to be about learning discernment. It's called Who Can You Trust?
Right.
And it sort of takes this sort of having been burned, having lived life in a rather emotionally risky kind of way, and then looks at like the wisdom that sort of comes and says, hey, maybe we need to actually think about what are the healthy choices or decisions for us. And I don't think I was fully conscious of this when I was writing it, but this amazing thing happened, which was that as soon as it came out, in the couple of months afterwards, with the press and the shows that I played to celebrate the release and everything, I had this moment where I was like, oh wow, yeah, I'm good. Like, that was all my trauma in there. That was all the stuff that I had been through that was really sitting and holding this grief in me. And I noticed, I was like, I'm done. I'm like, I'm good. I'm ready to write about something else. Oh my God. Like, what do I do next? If this has been my whole story up till this point, what is the next chapter after that?
Mhm.
And connecting that to Grant's concept of the hypersigil, and realizing after that I kind of had a responsibility to myself now with like what I write and what I sing, because like many artists, I think a lot of us get caught in this cycle of like using our pain for our art. We have something that happens to us it causes grief or trauma or pain or whatever, and we put it into a song or a poem or whatever it is that we're creating, and we put it out there, and people are like, oh, this is beautiful, and we're like, now I need more pain, right? And so we get caught in that cycle. And so realizing that it wasn't just like, oh, this happens to me, I write about it, I put it out there. It's also something happens to me in the infinite reality that I possess. Like I'm in this life where I'm literally, my system is taking in information at 8 billion bits per second through my five senses, as are all of ours. And I'm somehow focused, like, but the pain is what I'm writing about. And then it amplifies because I put it out there, and then more and more of what I am singing about, what I am writing about, is created. So how do I stop that? How do I write about things that, and it doesn't mean that there has not been pain in my music since, but it does mean that when there's pain, the aim of it in my music is to understand it and transmute it. So to be honest with you, it's not like I do a ritual and then I sit down and write a song like this. And it's not like I'm like doing the LVRP or anything like, I mean, sure, maybe sometimes, but really it just is this understanding that my words are going to create things in ways that at this point will be far beyond my prediction. And also having some trust and some faith that if something is coming up for me to write about, then there's also probably a reason. There are things that I've written that I didn't even know I didn't even understand. There's some songs on the forthcoming album that, goodness, like I'm still figuring out that there's stuff that has come up within them. I'm like, I know, like, wow, this stuff that I wrote about that even some of it I thought in the beginning was purely fiction. I was just like, this sounds good. I like the song, whatever, I'll write about this. And then things popping off and amplifying and coming true, and not only coming true, but being revealed as part of a situation that was there already, but which I didn't know yet about. And so it really is not about any elaborate fancy rituals. It is all the magic is in the work of the music and the songwriting itself. Like it's all right there. And just the knowledge that I'm going to write something and it's going to influence my reality. So I better be responsible with that power for myself first and foremost.
Well, something that I have been really wanted to talk to you about is, because you have worked so closely with Grant Morrison over the last few years, there's he named you his magical heir. So people hear that, but what exactly does that mean? Does that mean if there's a question about his system or his practice, they would come to you? What does that entail?
Yeah. Well, it was first my suggestion. I actually suggested to Grant back in 2019 that we turn our friendship into a formal apprenticeship.
Okay.
And it seemed to me at the time, and at the time it was just sort of like, we have this really lovely friendship. We hang out, we geek out about magic and the occult, and it seemed like for two people such as we are, I was like, wouldn't it just be more interesting if we lived the archetype of this? Like, I would love to call myself a magician's apprentice. And you can, at that time, like Grant had sometime, had asked me to do a spell, like for the return of their lost cat, and I was so nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what if I fail? Right. And sure enough, like I did the spell, and a few weeks later, the cat came back. And I was basically at the time, I was like, look, teach me things, and you can also have me do spell work on your behalf. Like, I'm fully ready to like wax on, wax off, like Mr. Miyagi. I'll clean your house, paint the car, whatever, whatever all that was. And actually their interpretation of my suggestion was like so much more generous and so much more comprehensive. And what they decided was that they were like, well, for me in magic, it's always come down to the Kabbalah, the tree of life, as a symbol for the stages that a magician goes through. I always come back to orienting myself on the tree. So I'm going to create these lessons that have some exercises or some reading assignments or, things to do that are all based on the spheres of the Kabbalah.
Right.
And at first I think we thought like, oh, we'll do like one a month or whatever. It took over, and it's been like so much more like longer and extraordinary and more expansive, to the point where like now my own life has like synced up in these very bizarre ways with the spheres that we're on at the time. So I think in the end, the goal is actually to create a collaborative epistolary study book out of these lessons. And that it'll be, the lessons that Grant has given, or the reading assignments, and then my response to it, in sort of like almost like a letters to a young poet kind of a way, so that other folks can go through the curriculum in much the same way, and they can read about the results that I got. They can, they can do the exercises and do the readings that Grant has prescribed within them, and either follow along with my journey just to read about, or do it themselves, I hope, as well. So there hasn't really been like a Grant Morrison curriculum, like a method. So together, this is what we're creating, and I'm really just honored to be, the guinea pig, the test subject in the best of all possible ways, and to make that knowledge and that wisdom into a compendium that can be followed along with. And yeah, that's something that's extraordinarily exciting to me. But that said, we started in 2019. It's now 2024, and we are just wrapping up Netzach, and we'll be crossing the bridge into Tifereth either, the end of this year or maybe early next year. So it will be some years, like this is going to be probably a lifelong work, but it's a lifelong work I'm very excited about.
Now, you're both a part of Richard Metzger's Magic Show documentary. And one of the things that I saw in a clip that featured you was the saying, "Oh, nothing is true, everything is permitted." What exactly does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I think that is originally a Peter Carroll quote, because I know that is something that has, been thrown around in Chaos Magick as one of its sort of core tenets, right? And for me, what that means when we look at nothing is true, what that means is that none of us has a monopoly on objective reality. Not a single one of us, right? Some of us are closer to it than others, perhaps, right? If we are able to, the more perspectives we are able to integrate, then the greater our viewpoint becomes. But nobody is ever able to completely 100% objectively perceive reality. So therefore, if we understand that we are always filtering things through our bias, our beliefs, our understanding of the world, then what we're able to do is we can choose our beliefs based on the results that they lead to. Choose the beliefs that lead to the outcomes that you want. And people find this very confronting at times, because their beliefs are so deeply held to them. But no, this is true. If this was not true, then the whole worldview I have constructed would be faulty, or would be, just one miniature little Epcot golf ball in a sea of, infinite, whatever. And shattering that is, as I'm sure I think anyway, is really the initiation into magic, is realizing that your your miniature worldview is just one of many. And the more you can integrate and perceive, then of course, like the greater you get. But what that means also is that you can choose yours, and there is that freedom to choose. There is that freedom to say, even with something, and I'll be, well, I was going to say we'll be spicy about this, but we're already on an occult podcast. I'm probably not going to offend people, right? But like, let's say you were raised in like a really Christian church, and I was raised, I was raised Christian. I was raised both Lutheran and Catholic at the same time in a weird way. So, but let's say like you were raised like evangelical or something, where it's really, they really kind of, try to indoctrinate you with these beliefs to keep you in this specific community. And let's say you were to look at that and you were to say, well, is this actually leading to my best life? I've been told that these things were true, and I have grown up believing that these things were true. But is this getting me the result that I want? Do I want to be a member of this community? Maybe I think that I do right now, but maybe maybe I don't. And it's like that with everything, even with less extreme beliefs. Anything that we categorically believe is true, I think we owe it to ourselves to look at it and say, actually, is that belief serving me? Because I think it's true, But my belief that it is true may actually be keeping me from a different belief that might actually be equally as true or not true or whatever, and will actually lead me to better living overall, which I think is the point of doing magic, is all about better living. And when we say everything is permitted, it's funny because, of course, like, again, it feels like a very spicy thing to say, like, oh, everything is permitted, nothing is off limits. People think like, oh, that means you can get away with evil or whatever. Well, things have consequences, right? But I think it's really smart actually to realize, to tell ourselves that actually everything is permitted. Like, there aren't, yes, there are consequences to actions, and we should be very mindful of those. But I think it's smarter to realize, like, to think of it in that sense of, I do this action and then this consequence results, rather than saying like, I like, that's not permitted. Like, no, there's people who do all sorts of things. So if you look at our behaviors and you say, it is possible for me to behave in really somewhat in any way that I want.
Mhm.
But that means that I need to look at that with really rigorous discernment, and again, look at the results of those actions. So if the first half of that statement is about belief, right? Nothing is true. Everything is true. Nothing is true. So choose the beliefs that leads to the outcomes that you want, and everything is permitted. So do the actions that lead to the outcomes that you want. And again, people will take that as an excuse to be amoral, but I always come back to that, and I say, actually, that I mean, look at Diddy, right? I mean, Diddy, shoot, boy, he really took that everything is permitted way too far. But now there are obviously consequences for that, and there are obviously, like, there are consequences for harming others, even in far less extreme ways. If you act like a jerk to people, you're gonna, you're not gonna end up with many friends. So, but I think it's important for us to kind of realize that we do have that freedom of agency, but then really look at it. I choose to be what I consider a good person, or what I consider, and quote unquote good. No one's ever all true, right? But like, I choose to live by my integrity, because actually that has gotten me far better results in my own life than the maybe, more narcissistically oriented patterns or defensively oriented patterns that I had that were a result of my trauma. So everything it may be permitted, but really, like, behaving in alignment with my integrity has absolutely gotten me the best results in my life. So yeah, looking at these things not as being these rigid rule structures, but being like, in this sea of infinite possibility, it is possible to make all of these different choices, and which ones are you going to make, because you are the one who is the author of your life.
Right. Which actually makes me think that, when I hear phrases like nothing is true, everything is permitted, it almost sounds like, these doctrines that we've been fed for millennia that tell you this is how the world is. Throw that out the window. Just throw it out the window and do what you need to do to get to your end goal. Like how you were talking about the way Chaos Magick is results. It's like, do what you need to do to get to the result that you're looking for, as opposed to, okay, you have to go to church on Sunday, you have to take communion, you have to, in order to get to your end goal. Like, no, you don't have to do that. You can do whatever works for you at the time, is
Yeah.
kind of how I took that.
That, and also understanding that whoever made those rules was operating in a different world, because honestly, like, by the time you get to actually, like, discerning and writing down a set of rules, the world has evolved. Like, for my generation, and I'm a millennial, we were all told, get a college degree. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter what you get it in, but you get your college degree and it'll pay for itself,
Right.
and it's like, and I'm very privileged in some cases, because even, I don't come from a wealthy family, but I come from a family that had enough stability that they were basically like, you know, they were like, we'll take care of your student loans because we don't want you to have to go into the world with that much debt. So I say that even as someone with a great deal of privilege, but even I can see through that lie that I was told back then, you know? So that Wayne Gretzky quote, skate to where the puck is going, you know, and looking at those rules and systems as products of their time, as products of a sort of generational myopia, and that the rules that worked for those who are now prescribing them to us, the world may not be the same as it is anymore. And one thing that I think is really helpful with magic is, you know, in terms of spirit work, spirit can see farther down timelines often than we can perceive what is happening in the future, can align you now with the things that will be coming to you down the pipeline. And divination too, you know, figuring out, saying, well, what will work. I love doing A/B divinations, you know, if it's, hey, like I'm looking at a choice, if I do A, what happens? If I do B, what happens? So yeah, magic can really help with all of that. And so many systems and dogmas are just people trying to source security about the way that they're living their life. And I think part of walking the perilous path of magic is realizing the illusion of so much of that security, and that true illusion is, true security is knowing that whatever storms come your way, that you have it within you to navigate the path, in my humble opinion.
So, going back to the magic show, how did you get involved with the documentary? Was it through Grant, or how did that come together?
Yep. Yeah. That was Grant. Grant reached out to me, and I guess Richard had reached out to Grant, maybe looking for recommendations of folks in Los Angeles. So of course, you know, Grant threw my name in the hat, and it was wonderful. It was a great project. I'm so looking forward to it coming out and being able to see all the other interviews with other folks. It's been really cool connecting with other folks who were interviewed, some of whom I knew already, and some of whom are new to me. Yeah, it was really fun.
I'm learning a lot about the LA occult scene. Like I interviewed Lisa Derrick. She's also in the
She
magic
is so
show.
wonderful. She
Yeah,
is so lovely. I've known her since 2016.
nice. And I
Yeah,
also
she's
spoke
great.
to Pleasant Gaiman. So you're all in there together, and it's really cool to me because I love the idea of, because I've always said LA is a magical city. Not in the
I really
Hollywood
feel
way, but like in the occult way.
that.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Well,
going back.
they're so intertwined too, though,
Yeah.
you know?
So
Do you
have
know that
you?
disco song, LA Devotee?
No, say it again. I didn't hear.
It's a Panic at the Disco song called LA Devotee.
Oh no, I haven't heard that.
Like magic on Mulholland Drive, swimming pools, sunny desert skies, drinking white wine in the blushing light, just
Right.
another LA devotee. I think that song captures that marriage between like the magic, like secular magic of like Hollywood magic, and the occult magic, and the way that those overlap in Los Angeles. It's almost like LA is that sweet spot of the conscious and the unconscious, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
the magic that is happening, that like the movie magic that just looks like the mundane stuff, and then the actual magic that is happening, the way that those cross over. Just yeah, LA has been very, very, very good to me.
Well, when you consider Jack Parsons is from LA, and there's like I can't even remember how many Thelemic temples there are, or groups there are here,
Oh
and
yeah, the
amongst
Masonic
other.
lodges. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the history of Laurel Canyon and things like that, not only is it rock and roll, but there's the cult stuff too. It's just, there's just this esoteric spirit that lives here, and I always thought that was very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that. You feel it here. You feel it in the land, in the air. There is something really, 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 really special. That was something that I didn't fully understand, was that there are places that have certain energies to them. And I think sometimes we ourselves as people can resonate with those energies or not, you know, and
Mhm.
sometimes you travel places and you expect to feel a lot of magic there. And then you're like, no, not picking up on a whole lot or whatever. And then you go somewhere that surprises you. And LA definitely surprised me in that way.
Nice. So, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting into chaos magic? Like, where would be a good place to start if someone was like, Arden, I saw your interview, I want to learn more. Where should they begin?
Well, without being too self-aggrandizing, I would certainly recommend the Repatterning Project. And and I'll certainly there's plenty of ways to have a chaos magic initiation, but what I like about the Repatterning Project is that it is really grounded in how our beliefs. So it's 98% of it is not actually overt occult material. It's psychology, it's trauma, it's addiction research, it's attachment styles, it's all this other stuff, but it really takes a look at all of the things that make up our human operating system. And so when you get to know your human operating system, then you can understand how your beliefs, habits, and patterns and mindsets formed. And that's when you can undo them and start to reprogram them. And that is what the Repatterning Project ultimately teaches. So it really is, in my feeling, it is a real breakdown of the chaos magic principles into, okay, how do you actually do this? We go through an assessment of like there's, and this was made, by a couple of psychologists back in 2008, but it's like a 144 question assessment that like tests you for these sort of 8 different potential trauma imprinted profiles, like these ways of being like, hey, if you act like this, you might have a little bit of this going on. And so we do that. And then we look at the answers for all 8 of them. How do we undo those? How do we replace them with better behaviors? So it really is like a boot camp in many ways. It's not one of those occult courses that's kind of going to appear all witchy at the surface and maybe tell you a whole bunch of history and a couple things and practices you can do. Like it really is an initiation into like, oh, these are all the things that I believe and this is why. And this is in my power to change. So now I no longer actually have the luxury of complaining if I don't like how things are going, because now I know how to rewire my own system. So that's the that's the quick pitch for that. But I would say, aside from that, if someone is interested in a self-study or whatnot, it's just really to question the efficacy of everything that you believe, and to look at what you're doing and really just unflinchingly say, is this getting me the result that I want? And that's absolutely, where mine started out, because, before I moved to Los Angeles but my NLP certification actually came from being in social circles with a whole bunch of dating coaches and pickup artists. I wrote a book on dating when I was in my 20s and everything, and finally looking at my life and saying, well, yeah, I can approach people, I can create attraction. I've had all these really amazing adventurous experiences in seduction and whatnot that has led to a lot of fun. But oh my gosh, like I'm constantly getting treated horribly in my relationships. Like clearly whatever I'm doing is not working, and I'm supposed to be the expert. I wrote the book on this. What is the flaw in my logic here? So I really do believe that 90% of depression comes from, we have learned a pattern that we think is supposed to lead to a certain outcome, and we're doing it over and over again, and it's not working. So therefore we're getting frustrated and we're feeling despair. And that 90% of anxiety comes from, we're doing a pattern that has gotten us inconsistent results. So we do that thing again, and we're not sure if it's actually going to lead to that. We make a bid and then we feel, oh God, is it going to work or is it not going to work? At least for me, I think that was, as someone who was in and out of a lot of the mental health industrial complex throughout my 20s, with a lot of different labels, depression and anxiety, medication, and blah, 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 really, coming to the point in my life where I am right now, looking at that and saying, like, this is all so much simpler than we have made it out to be. Of course, you are going to be anxious if you are doing something and you're not sure how it's going to go. Of course, you're going to be depressed if you're doing the same thing over and over and it's not working for you. And we are not born into a society, as I'm sure you know, that sets us up for success. We are born into a society that wants us to spend a whole ton of money on student loans, and then go into these jobs where we are so often overworked overworked, underpaid, and then, we get off work and the only thing that we have the energy for is to consume, is to sit there and click on Amazon and to watch TV and play video games and things like that. Nothing against TV, video games, or even consumerism. I can be consumerist at some of the best of times. I love having little things around me that make me happy. But it's the fact that like our energy is being drained. We don't. It is our default, like the path that we are generally given in life for most of us does not lead us to a place where we have a lot of bandwidth for our creative energy. We just kind of keep repeating the same things over and over. So being able to look at that and look critically at society, and also, I hate saying this, but to help ourselves to not depend on it as much as we ideally should be able to, because even though I very much believe that we should be in a society that cares for all of its citizens, the reality of it is that we are not right now. And it is going to be easier in the long run for us to help ourselves first, to fill up our own cup, put our own oxygen mask on first, and then do the work for a more equitable and just society. Because certainly we can burn ourselves out a lot fighting for justice when we ourselves are not yet being taken care of. So I actually think the greatest act of resistance is to get ourselves, to take that moment to be selfish, get ourselves to a place of sustainability. And then when we get there, then our energy can be put to better use to not only build the foundations of our own lives, but then to help others, and to then really fight for our society to become more just and equitable. And we'll have more energy to put behind that fight at that point.
How has Chaos Magic changed for you since you got started? Because I know traditionally Chaos Magic, for example, sigils, where you would sit down, get your intention together, write it out, and then you would create the sigil based, in the formula.
Yep,
Have
I
you
still do.
do you still do it by hand? Because I know there are computer programs that do it now too, or do you still do it by hand?
Yeah, I do it by hand. I'm very comforted by the idea that I can find every letter in my sigil. And not every magician does it this way. There are also magicians who will break the letters down into their individual lines and curves. And there's some who like Laura Tempest Zakroff, who doesn't use letters at all, who literally just works on symbols and visual art. So there's many ways to do this. But for me, I always feel comforted, like, oh no, if all of the consonants are in there, and spirit will know what I'm talking about. So that for me is a sort of like security step in my own sigil work. I think the thing that has changed the most for me is actually just the frequency of the amount of spells I'm casting. And I actually owe that a great deal to my colleague Alexander Moore of Practical Occult, who we began a friendship in I guess like 2023 was when it really kind of took off. And the frequency with which he encouraged me to cast, to really like cast on all different details of my life. And another thing he taught me that has really evolved Chaos Magic for me is to use divination a lot more frequently, and specifically to use a pendulum too. So now, when I was starting out, it'd be like, all right, I'll make my sigil, I'll carve it on the side of a candle, and I'll launch it, and then I'll wait for things to happen. And that was remarkably pretty effective. But what I do nowadays is, I'll do my sigil, and then I'll get my divinatory tools out, and I'll be like, all right, what's the best day to cast this intention on, if I don't know already? And what's the best color candle to use? And what is the best oil to anoint this candle with? And what is the best herb blend? And also, like, do I need any other materia for this spell that I don't know about? Sometimes I'll get a yes, and I'll literally be sitting at my coffee table right there, which is my little my coffee table of practice, and I'll literally be like, all right, well, is it is it in the living room half of the apartment, or the bathroom half of the apartment? Is it to my right? Is it to my left? And I'll literally narrow it down to an object in the room. And sometimes it's wild how specific the object will narrow down to, and in a way that relates to the intention. So the basic sigil crafting has remained almost completely the same for me. It's all the other, it's like this sort of expanding practice and all this other, and also keeping, I think when you first start out, when I first started out, we're kind of in this paradigm of I cast a spell and then I wait, and did it work or did it not work? Whereas now I'm looking at the picture of my life far more holistically, and casting at multiple angles that might all lead to the same intention. So, folks will ask me nowadays, well, how many of your spells work? And I'm like, honestly, I'm like probably between 80 and 90%. And that honestly might even be conservative, because there's stuff that will pop off later or whatnot. But it's hard for me to even tell, because I'm doing so much magic that, I'd have to sit down. And sometimes I do, I sit down with divination and be like, what part did this do? What part did this do? What, there's a certain campaign in which I've said 6 different novenas and a litany at this point, keeping my Catholic upbringing in the mix, and sitting down with divination and being like, all right, you guys, like, who did what? I want to know like who to give credit to, and, and then figuring it out. So the vastness, the expanse of, gosh, yesterday was Wednesday, so it's road opener day, and I am specifically in a contract with Hermes for my music career, specifically for my work in music and mental health. And so, yeah, on yesterday I cast 8 road openers and 5 of them are weekly ones that I keep going, just ongoing stuff that just needs to continually be hit. And then 3 of them were, for specific, okay, well, I need a one-off result here. I need a one-off result here and there. And it's so much more effective as a practice than, like, I'm sure you're familiar with Jason Miller and his term macro enchantment, right?
Yes.
And yeah, for Jason Miller, the idea of a macro enchantment is when we have a big thing that we want to bring in, we start with that big ritual for that big intention. But most people stop there. Most people, including me when I was a beginner, but I think I probably because of my autism and I'm good at pattern recognition, I actually recognized early on that I'm like, oh, that sigil, it starts to bring everything to you that you need. And then you need to actually live your life in a way that deals with the things that are coming up or being brought up and whatever. It gives you everything you need, and it puts it in your way so that you can deal with it, but you have to take those actions as well. And
Right.
so now my magic practice has really kind of expanded exponentially, because now I'm using magic for those other things that also get brought up. I'm like, okay, this was the macro enchantment, but now this is happening, and all right, now I need to do this, now I need to do that, and I need to do that, and it's it's wild. It's been an extraordinarily expansive and adventurous way to live, and I've been casting that way for a little over a year now. Honestly, like I spent the first, I guess, really like almost 10 years of my practice, a couple sigils a year kind of was all I needed. And it was all I needed because I had so much calcification in my own patterns and so much other work I had to do, moving density and making these albums and building my business and all of that stuff. But now I've reached this point where, yeah, I'm like, all right, let's expand. The foundation has been built, and let's now tackle all of these little things. And it's a very fun, very magical way to live.
Well, Arden, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been amazing. If anyone wants to follow you, learn more about what you're doing, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, well, I've got my site, the Repatterning Project, that has all of the descriptions of my courses there. Also, just quick plug, I'm teaching my Myths and Magic course upcoming. We start on October 20th, and that is a 4-week course in narrative magic and archetypal invocation and the art of the hypersigil, which is for the thing that has really, from the beginning, really powered my magic, that idea of how to turn your life into the story, the hero's journey that you yourself want to be living, how to be in that main character energy and use the power of storytelling and character and archetype to drive your life forward. So that is, if someone has been maybe, interested in some of the stuff we're talking about, that container will be available to join October 20th is when we get started. And aside from that, I'm on Instagram at It's Me, Arden Leigh, and Arden and the Wolves and the Repatterning Project, all three of those for the different work that I do. You can find me on Facebook, and I've also got a group called the Repatterning Parlor, which is a private Facebook group that anyone can join if they're just interested in hearing more about the work and kind of vibing with the community. A lot of our graduates and alumni are there and are very generous with their own knowledge, to pass it on to new people. So, we love getting questions, getting people who like unpacking stuff there, or sometimes just sharing memes most of the time about growth and self-improvement and all that wonderful stuff. So yeah. And I have a YouTube channel too. So yeah, all the all the usual platforms.
Well, we'll link all of that in the description below. And again, thank you so much, Arden, for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Cast